The galaxy had known about Earth for a very long time. The conquered of aligned species kept records of every world that might one day produce intelligent life, and Earth had been on their watch list for millions of years. They called it Seven, a name that carried a simple warning: nothing good could come from such a place. The planet was a nightmare by galactic standards. Its gravity was crushing compared to most inhabited worlds. The atmosphere was a corrosive mix of oxygen that could cause fires to spread without control. The weather systems were violent and unpredictable, spawning storms that could level cities. Earthquakes split the ground without warning. Volcanoes buried entire regions in ash and fire. The oceans were filled with predators that had evolved for millions of years to become perfect killing machines. And yet somehow, intelligent life had emerged there. Not just emerged, but thrived. Ambassador Ethitha was chosen to lead the first official delegation to Earth. They were an old species, careful and diplomatic, known for their patience in dealing with primitive civilizations. They had guided dozens of young species into the galactic community over thousands of years. They expected humans to be grateful for the attention. Eth's shuttle landed in a place the humans called Geneva. She had studied their world extensively during the journey, but nothing had prepared her for the experience of actually standing on its surface. The gravity pulled at her thin limbs with uncomfortable force. The sunlight was harsh and bright, almost painful to her sensitive eyes. The air carried strange smells that her translators could not fully identify. But it was the humans themselves that truly unsettled her. They moved through this hostile environment as if it were nothing. Children ran and played under the crushing gravity. Adults walked without protective suits through air that could feed fire. They smiled and laughed as if they were not living on a world that actively tried to kill them every single day. The diplomatic meetings went smoothly enough on the surface. Humans were curious about the galaxy and eager to learn their place in it. They asked intelligent questions and seemed to understand the complex political relationships between the major species. Eth found herself almost liking them. But she also filed a classified report to the Conquered Council that night. "These beings are more dangerous than we anticipated," she wrote. "They have not merely survived their world, they have conquered it. They have bent an environment of constant death to their will through sheer stubbornness and aggression. I recommend extreme caution in our dealings with them." The council read her report and decided she was being dramatic. Humans were physically unimpressive compared to many species. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no venom. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards. What possible threat could they pose? So the integration began. Humans were offered minor roles in galactic society. They could work as laborers on space stations, where their tolerance for harsh conditions made them useful. They could serve as entertainers, their strange art and music providing novelty for bored alien audiences. Some were recruited into the lower ranks of the Conquered's peacekeeping forces, where their endurance was valued for patrol duties on unpleasant worlds. Commander Jenna was one of these recruits. She had served in Earth's military for 15 years before the Conquered made contact. When the opportunity came to serve in a galactic peacekeeping force, she had jumped at the chance. She wanted to see the stars, to explore the universe that had suddenly opened up before humanity. What she found instead was a galaxy that had grown soft. The Conquered had existed for over 10,000 years. In that time, they had created a complex system of treaties and agreements that were supposed to keep the peace between species. Every conflict was negotiated. Every dispute was mediated. Every act of aggression was met with diplomatic protests and economic sanctions. The system worked in a way. The major species had not fought a full-scale war in centuries, but it worked only because everyone agreed to follow the rules, and quickly learned that not everyone did. The Dominion existed on the edges of conquered space. They were a warrior species who had never fully accepted the peaceful order that the Conquered tried to maintain. They signed the treaties when it suited them and ignored them when it did not. Their ships raided colonies in the outer regions. They took slaves and resources and dared the conquered to stop them. The conquered never did. Read the reports that crossed her desk with growing frustration. A transport attacked, 30 dead. A mining colony raided, 200 taken as slaves. A diplomatic vessel destroyed with all hands. Each incident was followed by the same response: strongly worded protests, economic penalties that they ignored, calls for negotiation that went nowhere. "Why don't we do something?" she asked her superior officer, a named who commanded the peacekeeping station where she served. "We have the ships, we have the weapons. Why do we let them keep doing this?" Looked at her with the patient expression that she had come to recognize as condescension. "You are young, Commander. Your species is young. You do not understand how these things work. They are dangerous, yes, but a war with them would cost thousands of lives. Millions, perhaps. Is that worth it to stop a few raids?" "It's worth it to the people being raided," replied. "Their sacrifices maintain the greater peace," said. "This is how civilization works." Said nothing more, but she remembered. The attack on 4 came 6 months later. The colony was a joint settlement, home to members of a dozen species who had come together to build something new on a frontier world. 3,000 people lived there, working the mines and farms that were slowly transforming the planet into something livable. Among them were 47 humans, most of them engineers and construction workers who had been recruited for their ability to work in harsh conditions. The struck at dawn. Their raiders came in fast, bypassing the minimal defenses with ease. They killed anyone who resisted and rounded up the rest for transport to slave markets. The attack was brutal and efficient, planned by warriors who had conducted hundreds of similar operations without serious consequence. The distress call reached station within the hour. She ran to the command center and found already there, studying the reports with that same patient expression. "How soon can we send ships?" she demanded. "We cannot," replied. "The nearest fleet is 3 days away. By the time they arrive, they will be long gone. We will file a protest and demand the return of the hostages through diplomatic channels." "Diplomatic channels," repeated. "The same diplomatic channels that have never gotten a single slave returned in the 20 years since you started using them." "You forget your place, Commander." "My place is protecting people. Isn't that why we're here?" Turned away from her. "Your species has much to learn about how the galaxy works. I suggest you begin that education now." Left the command center. She walked to her quarters and sat in the darkness for a long time, thinking. Then she opened her communications channel and began sending messages. The humans scattered across conquered space were a small community. They kept in touch with each other, sharing news from home and helping each other navigate the strange politics of galactic society. Within hours, had contacted every human serving in the peacekeeping forces. She explained what had happened. She told them what she planned to do. Not one of them refused to join her. They gathered at a remote station where sympathetic allies helped them acquire weapons and a small transport ship. 47 humans, all of them trained soldiers, all of them tired of watching innocent people suffer while the conquered did nothing. Led them to 4. They were still there when they arrived. They had set up a temporary camp while they processed their captives, sorting them by species and value. Their raiders patrolled the perimeter with the casual confidence of warriors who had never faced a real challenge. They had never faced humans before. The battle began at sunset. S team hit the camp from 3 directions at once, using tactics that they had never encountered. Humans did not fight like other species. They did not maintain careful formations or follow predictable patterns. They adapted. They improvised. They took risks that no sane being would consider. They outnumbered them by nearly 50 to 1. They had better weapons, better armor, better ships. By every logical measure, they should have won easily. The battle lasted 6 hours. When the sun rose over 4, the raiders were broken. 4 of their warships had been destroyed. Over 2,000 of their warriors lay dead. The survivors had fled into space, carrying tales of the monsters who had come from the stood among the freed hostages as the last ship vanished into the distance. 3 of her people were wounded. None were dead. She expected to face punishment when she returned to conquered space. She had disobeyed direct orders, started an unauthorized military action, and potentially triggered a war with a major power. By conquered law, she should have been court-martialed and imprisoned. Instead, she found the conquered council waiting for her. The chamber was enormous, filled with representatives from hundreds of species. Eth was there, the same ambassador who had first come to Earth. Her expression was unreadable as walked to the center of the room. "Commander," the council speaker began, "you have violated numerous laws and protocols. You have endangered the peace that we have maintained for thousands of years. You have acted without authority and without approval." Stood straight and said nothing. "However," the speaker continued, "you have also demonstrated capabilities that we did not know your species possessed. They have withdrawn from our borders. They have released all hostages taken in the past decade. They have requested formal negotiations for a new treaty." The chamber was silent. "We find ourselves in need of such capabilities," the speaker said. "The galaxy is not as peaceful as we would like to believe. There are threats that we have ignored for too long. We would like to offer you a position, Commander, a new role for your people in our society." Looked around at the assembled representatives. She saw fear in some faces, hope in others, calculation in many. The galaxy had just learned what humans could do. Now it had to decide what to do with that knowledge. "What kind of position?" she asked. The speaker made a gesture that her translator interpreted as a smile. "We would like you to teach us how to fight." 5 years passed after the battle on 4, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Commander Jenna was now Admiral, head of the Conquered's newly reorganized military forces. Human tactical advisors served on every major warship. Human trainers ran combat schools on a dozen worlds. Human diplomats had earned a reputation for negotiating treaties that actually held, largely because everyone knew what would happen if they were broken. The Dominion had become almost cooperative. They still grumbled about the new order, still dreamed of their warrior glory days. But they had learned a valuable lesson on 4. There were beings in the galaxy more dangerous than themselves. Better to work with them than against them. But not everyone was happy with humanity's rise. The elder species of the Conquered had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They had built the systems that kept peace. They had established the protocols that governed relations between species, and they had done so by being careful, cautious, and above all, patient. Humans were none of these things. Director ran the Conquered's intelligence network from a station orbiting Neptune, far from the watching eyes of the inner worlds. He had been recruited by 3 years earlier, brought in to build something that the Conquered had never truly had before, a real spy service. The Conquered gathered information, of course. They monitored communications and tracked ship movements and maintained files on every significant event in known space. But they did not spy. They did not send agents into enemy territory. They did not dig for secrets that others wanted to keep hidden. Change that. His agents were scattered across the galaxy, listening and watching and reporting back. Most of them were human, though he had recruited members of other species who shared his belief that knowing the truth was more important than respecting privacy. They had uncovered corruption in the Conquered's own ranks. They had mapped the secret military installations. They had identified threats that the official channels had missed or ignored. And they had found the silence. The report landed on his desk on a quiet Tuesday. One of his deep-cover agents, a woman named who had been investigating anomalies in old star charts, had made a disturbing discovery. There was a region of space, far from the main shipping lanes, that every official map left blank, not just empty, but deliberately erased. Had gone looking for answers. What she found chilled to his core. 17 species had once lived in that region. Their civilizations had spanned hundreds of worlds. They had built cities and ships and works of art that still floated in the void, perfectly preserved by the vacuum of space. And then, approximately 1,000 years ago, they had all died. Not slowly, not through war or disease or natural disaster. They had been killed, all of them, in a span of days. This report included images that would haunt dreams for years. Cities turned to glass by unimaginable heat. Ships torn apart by forces that current science could not explain. Worlds stripped of all life down to the bacterial level, their surfaces scorched clean. And at the center of the silence, dormant but still functional, a structure the size of a small moon. The weapon that had done all this. Took the report to Admiral immediately. She read it in silence, her face growing harder with each page. "Have you this?" she asked when she finished. 3 times, replied. Went back with a full team. The evidence is overwhelming. And the Conquered knew about this. The founding species established the quarantine zone 1,000 years ago. They classified everything at the highest level and buried it so deep that even their own successors forgot the details. All anyone remembers now is that the region is forbidden. Stared at the images of dead worlds for a long moment. They hid from it, she said finally. They found this thing and instead of dealing with it, they just hid. It appears so. And in 1,000 years, none of them thought that maybe hiding wasn't enough, that maybe they should try to understand what they were hiding from. Said nothing, the answer was obvious. The next few weeks were the most delicate of his career. She brought the evidence to a small group of trusted allies in the Conquered leadership. She showed them images, her data, her analysis. She explained what the weapon was capable of and what it might do if it ever activated again. The reactions were mixed. The younger species, the ones who had joined the Conquered more recently, were horrified. They demanded action. They wanted to know why this had been hidden from them, why they had been allowed to build their civilizations without knowing about the threat that lurked in the darkness. The elder species were different. "You do not understand," Ambassador Eth told during a private meeting. "We have survived for 10,000 years by being careful. The silence was created by a species that grew too fast, expanded too aggressively, attracted too much attention. The weapon that destroyed them was built as a response to their behavior." A response by whom? We do not know, we have never known. That is precisely why we maintain caution. So your plan is to just keep hiding and hope it never wakes up. Ed's expression was patient, condescending. Our plan has worked for 1,000 years. Your species has been part of the galactic community for less than a decade. Perhaps you should trust the wisdom of your elders. Your wisdom got 17 species killed. Their own aggression got them killed. We learned from their mistake. The argument went in circles for hours. Left the meeting frustrated and angry, but also worried. She had seen the elder species' position before. They genuinely believed that hiding was the best option. They would rather live in fear than face the threat directly. And they had the votes to enforce their preference. The full Conquered Council met 3 days later. The chamber was packed with representatives from every member species, summoned to hear the evidence that team had gathered. The images of the silence were projected on massive screens. The data scrolled past in endless columns. Herself, describing what she had seen with the careful precision of a trained intelligence officer. When she finished, the chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the arguments began. The elder species spoke first, as tradition demanded. They acknowledged the threat but insisted that the current policy of avoidance remained the best option. They pointed out that the weapon had been dormant for 1,000 years. They argued that any attempt to confront it would only draw its attention. Humanity's aggressive expansion is already putting us at risk, one of the architects said, its crystalline form flickering with patterns that's translator interpreted as deep concern. Their military buildup, their constant confrontations, their refusal to accept peaceful solutions, these are exactly the behaviors that triggered the weapon in the first place. Perhaps if they had learned our ways instead of forcing their ways upon us, we would not be having this discussion. The younger species pushed back hard. They were tired of living under the elder species' rules. They had seen what humans could do on 4 and a dozen other worlds since. They believed that strength, not hiding, was the answer. "We have spent centuries cowering in the shadows," a representative said, surprising everyone with his support for the human position. "We have let pirates and raiders prey on our people because we were too afraid to fight back. And now we learn that this fear has been protecting us from nothing. The weapon has not moved in 1,000 years. Perhaps it never will, but if it does, hiding will not save us." The debate continued for hours. Alliances formed and dissolved. Old grudges surfaced. Long-buried resentments boiled over into accusations and counter-accusations. Through it all, watched and waited. When the vote finally came, it was closer than anyone had expected. The Conquered, that ancient institution that had governed the galaxy for 10,000 years, split down the middle. The elder species voted to maintain the quarantine and expand it further. The younger species voted to investigate the weapon and find a way to neutralize it. Neither side had a clear majority. The speaker called for a recess. Representatives gathered in small groups, negotiating, trading favors, making deals. Stayed in her seat, watching the chaos unfold. Eth approached her during the break. "This is your doing," the ambassador said. "You have divided us, weakened us. If the weapon activates now, the blame will fall on you." "The weapon was always there," replied. "I just made everyone look at it." "And what do you hope to accomplish? Even if you win this vote, you cannot destroy that thing. It killed 17 species. What makes you think humanity would do any better?" Smiled, and there was something in that expression that made Eth take a step back. "Because we come from a world that tried to kill us every day of our existence," she said. "We survived earthquakes and volcanoes and ice ages and plagues. We fought predators that evolved for millions of years to eat us, and we won. Our entire history is a record of facing impossible odds and refusing to die." She stood up and looked down at the delicate alien before her. "You want to hide from this thing. Hide. But some of us are done being afraid." The vote resumed an hour later. This time it was decisive. When the final tally was announced, the Conquered had not merely fractured. It had been reborn. A new coalition had emerged, led by the younger species and guided by humanity. They called themselves the Alliance of Free Worlds, and their first official act was to authorize a full investigation of the silence. The elder species to their core worlds, declaring neutrality. They would not help, but they would not interfere. They believed that the Alliance was making a terrible mistake, and they wanted no part of it. Did not try to change their minds. She had work to do. The investigation teams launched within the week. Human scientists and soldiers, accompanied by experts from dozens of allied species, ventured into the Forbidden Zone for the first time in a millennium. What they found there would change everything. But that discovery would have to wait. For now, it was enough that humanity had taken the first step. They had looked at the darkness that had terrified the galaxy for 1,000 years, and they had refused to look away. It was reflected as he watched the first ships depart, a very human response. General Miriam stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the stars drift past the observation windows. The ship was the largest ever built by human hands, a dreadnought designed from the ground up for combat against threats that the galaxy had spent 1,000 years trying to forget. Its hull was reinforced with materials developed specifically to withstand the energy signatures detected in the silence. Its weapons were powerful enough to crack moons. Its crew was the finest that humanity and its allies had to offer. And it was not alone. Behind the Defiance, stretching back to the edge of visual range, was the largest fleet ever assembled. Ships from 37 species flew in formation, their designs ranging from sleek human cruisers to the organic vessels grown by to the geometric constructs of the architects who had finally chosen to join the fight. Over 200 warships, carrying nearly 100,000 soldiers and crew members, all heading toward the one place in the galaxy that every sane being avoided. The silence. Admiral's voice came through the communication system, broadcast to every ship in the fleet. She was back on Neptune, coordinating the overall operation, but her presence was felt everywhere. "We have confirmed that the target is active," she said. "Long-range sensors show movement in the silence for the first time in recorded history. The weapon, whatever it is, has awakened. Our intelligence suggests that humanity's rapid expansion triggered its activation protocols. It is now orienting toward the densest concentration of inhabited worlds." Looked at the tactical display showing the weapon's projected course. If it was not stopped, it would reach the inner conquered worlds within months. Billions of lives hung in the balance. "The old conquered has evacuated," continued. "The elder species have fled to the galaxy's edge. They sent final messages condemning us for bringing this doom upon everyone. I want you all to hear their words, so you understand what we are fighting against." A recording played over the speakers, Ed's voice calm and bitter. "You were warned. We told you that your aggression would draw its attention. We told you that hiding was the only way. Now the weapon stirs, and our civilization dies because you could not control yourselves. History will remember humanity as the species that destroyed everything." The recording ended. Silence filled the bridge. "History will remember what we do here today," said. "Whatever happens, fight well. Fight for everyone who cannot fight for themselves. And remember what we are, survivors of a world that tried to kill us. We did not come this far to die now." The communication ended, turned to face her crew. "You heard the Admiral," she said. "All hands to battle stations. We reach the target in 6 hours." The fleet moved through empty space toward the silence. The region was appropriately named. No communication signals reached them. No ships appeared on sensors. The stars themselves seemed dimmer here, as if the light was being absorbed by something vast and hungry. They found the weapon at the heart of the dead zone. It was not what anyone had expected. The intelligence reports had described a structure the size of a small moon, and that was accurate enough. But the words did not capture the reality. The weapon, which someone had started calling the gardener, was beautiful. Its surface was covered with patterns that shifted and flowed like living things. Lights pulsed beneath its skin in rhythms that almost resembled breathing. It was clearly artificial, clearly ancient, and clearly designed by minds that thought in ways utterly alien to anything in the known galaxy. And it was clearly aware of them. The moment the fleet entered the silence, the gardener responded. Energy readings spiked across every sensor. Weapons that had not fired in 1,000 years powered up. Defensive systems activated. The thing that had killed 17 species stirred from its long sleep and prepared to kill again. The battle began at 3:47 hours, Galactic Standard Time. The Gardener's opening attack destroyed 12 ships before anyone could react. Beams of energy that sensors could barely track cut through shields and armor like they were not there. Explosions blossomed in the darkness as vessels died. The fleet scattered according to plan, breaking into smaller groups to present multiple targets. The Gardener tracked them all, its weapons firing in patterns too complex for any organic mind to predict. It had been designed to kill aggressive civilizations, and it was very, very good at its purpose. But it had been designed to kill civilizations that fought like the old conquered. Cautious civilizations, defensive civilizations, civilizations that would retreat when threatened and hide when pursued. It had not been designed for humans. Led the Defiance straight at the Gardener while other ships provided covering fire. The Dreadnought's shields absorbed hit after hit, failing one by one as they approached. Warning alarms screamed throughout the ship. Damage reports flooded in from every section. "Hold course," ordered. "All forward weapons, continuous fire." The Defiance poured everything it had into the Gardener's surface. Other ships joined the assault, concentrating their fire on a single point. The weapon's outer shell, which had withstood 1,000 years of neglect without a scratch, began to crack. The Gardener responded with devastating force. A pulse of energy swept outward, overloading sensors and communications across the fleet. Ships that had been carefully coordinating their attacks suddenly found themselves blind and alone. In the chaos that followed, the weapon picked them off one by one. But the humans adapted. Without communications, they fell back on training and instinct. Small groups of ships formed around the strongest survivors and continued the assault. When one captain fell, another took command without hesitation. When weapons failed, crews improvised. When ships were too damaged to fight, they aimed for the Gardener and accelerated. The first ramming attack came from a human frigate whose captain's name was lost in the confusion. Her ship had been crippled by an energy beam, all weapons gone, engines failing. Instead of retreating, she ordered full power to the remaining thrusters and drove her vessel directly into one of the Gardener's weapon arrays. The explosion carved a hole in the ancient structure. Others followed her example. A cruiser, its warrior crew seeing an honorable death before them, crashed into the Gardener's sensor cluster. An architect vessel, its crystalline crew singing harmonies of defiance, sacrificed itself to destroy a shield generator. The weapon that had been designed to punish aggression found itself facing aggression beyond anything its creators had imagined. By the third day, the fleet had lost a quarter of its ships. The Gardener had lost 1/10 of its offensive capability. Neither side showed any sign of stopping. On the 5th day, led the first boarding action. It was insane by any reasonable standard. The Gardener was designed to kill. Every surface, every system, every corridor had been built with the purpose of destroying any life that came too close. Radiation levels inside were lethal. Gravity fluctuated wildly. The temperature dropped to near absolute zero in some sections and spiked to hundreds of degrees in others. The boarding parties were entirely human. They wore the best protective suits that human and alien engineers could design. They carried weapons developed specifically for this mission. They knew that most of them would not return. They went anyway. The fighting inside the Gardener was unlike anything in human history. The weapon defended itself with automated systems that had been perfected over millions of years. Traps killed without warning. Defensive drones appeared from hidden compartments. The structure itself seemed to shift and change, corridors closing off and new passages opening to lead intruders to their deaths. The humans pushed through it all. They advanced meter by meter, marking their progress in blood and sacrifice. When one team was wiped out, another took their place. When the drones adapted to their weapons, they invented new tactics. When the traps killed the squad leaders, the privates took command and kept moving. On the 8th day, they reached the core. The Gardener's central processing system was a chamber of impossible beauty. Energy patterns danced across every surface. The air itself seemed to hum with power, and at the center, suspended in a web of light, was the control matrix that governed everything the weapon did. Sergeant Maria Santos, the ranking survivor of the original boarding teams, stood before it with her remaining squad. 17 humans out of the 300 who had entered the Gardener. All of them wounded, all of them exhausted, all of them still fighting. The weapon spoke to them. Not in words exactly. The communication was more direct than that. Images and concepts flooded their minds. The Gardener showed them its purpose, to protect the galaxy from species that grew too powerful, too aggressive, too dangerous. It showed them the civilizations it had destroyed, the threats it had neutralized, the peace it had maintained through fear. It showed them what would happen if it fell. Without a guardian, aggressive species would spread without limit. Wars would consume the galaxy. Extinction events would cascade from world to world until nothing remained. It offered them a choice. The humans could leave. They could withdraw their fleet and return to their worlds. The gardener would spare them if they agreed to limit their expansion, to accept its oversight, to become another cautious, careful civilization that hid from danger instead of facing it. Or they could continue fighting and be destroyed like all the others. Santos looked at her squad. She saw the exhaustion in their faces, the wounds they carried, the fear they refused to show. She thought about her family back on Earth, her husband, her daughters, all the people who would die if the gardener completed its mission. Then she thought about what it would mean to accept the weapon's terms, to live under constant threat, to raise her daughters in a galaxy ruled by fear. "We're from Earth," she said, though she was not sure if the gardener could understand words. "Do you know what that means? It means we come from a world that tried to kill us every single day. We survived ice ages. We survived plagues. We survived predators that had millions of years to learn how to hunt us. And we did not survive by hiding." She raised her weapon and aimed it at the control matrix. "We survived by being more dangerous than anything that threatened us." She fired. The gardener's core exploded. The energy release killed Santos and her entire squad instantly. It cascaded through the weapon systems, shutting down weapons and defenses and the ancient intelligence that had governed them. On the 12th day of the battle, the structure that had terrorized the galaxy for 1,000 years went dark. Outside, the surviving fleet watched as the gardener's lights flickered and died. 23 human ships had been destroyed. 14 Allied vessels were gone. Thousands of soldiers and crew members had given their lives for this moment. When the silence that followed finally broke, it was filled with cheering in 100 languages. Admiral listened to the celebration from her command center on Neptune. Tears ran down her face as she read the casualty reports, the names of friends and colleagues who would never come home. But she smiled too, because she understood what they had accomplished. The old conquered had spent 1,000 years hiding from the dark. They had built their civilization on fear, maintaining peace through avoidance and hoping that the monsters would never wake up. Humanity had a different approach. In the aftermath of the battle, the galaxy reorganized itself around a new truth. The alliance of free worlds became the dominant power in known space. Species that had once looked at humans with suspicion now looked at them with respect. Even the elder species, returning slowly from their exile, acknowledged that perhaps aggression was not always wrong. When the new governing body formed, no one objected to humanity's seat at its head. General, who had somehow survived the battle aboard the Defiance, gave a speech at the founding ceremony. She talked about the people who had died, the sacrifices that had been made, the future that had been purchased with blood. "We did not conquer the galaxy," she said. "We simply did what we have always done, faced an environment designed to kill us and refused to die. The gardener was built to destroy aggressive species. It did not understand that some species become aggressive because that is the only way to survive." She paused, looking out at the representatives from hundreds of worlds. "My people come from we survived earthquakes and volcanoes and ice ages and plagues. We fought predators and competitors and our own worst impulses. And we are still here, still fighting, still refusing to give up." She smiled, and it was the smile of a species that had faced the worst the universe could offer and come out the other side. "The galaxy has new rulers now, not because we wanted power, but because we understand something that the old order forgot. Survival is not about hiding from danger. It is about being more dangerous than anything that hunts you. The chamber erupted in applause, a thunder of sounds from beings who had learned to fight because humans had taught them how. And somewhere, in the ruins of the Gardener, the bodies of Sergeant Maria Santos and her squad drifted in the eternal darkness. They had died so that others could live without fear. It was, everyone agreed, a very human way to go.